The third triangle congruency shortcut we're going to look at is called HL, which stands for hypotenuse and leg. And so because we're talking about hypotenuse and a leg, specifically we must make sure we have a right triangle. And so there's really, even though there's two letters, just H and L, there's a third part that we need to match up, and that's the right angle. So there's three things we need to know. We have to have a hypotenuse matched up, a leg, and we have to make sure we have a right triangle. And so let's see if we can prove that these two triangles down here are congruent using HL. And so once again, I'm going to take a look at the tick marks I have and see if there's any that I can add. As we've talked about all along, since they share this side BC, I can add that tick mark right there because of the reflexive property. Those two sides are going to be congruent to itself. The side is congruent to itself. So let's see if I have enough. Here's the triangle that I'm looking at. Remember, there's three things we need to check for. The first thing is that we have a right triangle. I can see that I do. If I don't have a right triangle, you're definitely not going to use HL. The two sides that I have matched up need to be the hypotenuse and it needs to be the leg. So this is going to be the hypotenuse. It's across from the right angle. And yes, this is going to be a leg. So yes, these two triangles are congruent to each other because of HL. You may want to write out the things we just talked about, that we have a right angle, that we have the hypotenuse, that we have a leg matched up. Our triangle congruency statement then is going to be triangle ABC. Do that first one alphabetically if you can. And then the second triangle may or may not be alphabetical. Just be sure it matches up. This time it's definitely not alphabetical. That would match up to triangle DCB. Okay. In our second set of triangles, we see that we have that right angle. And so people are tempted, as soon as they see the right angle, to say, yeah, it's HL. But be careful, that's not always the case. I can add a tick mark for the reflexive property along KM. But that's the only thing that I can add. I can't add a tick mark over here and there just because they look the same. That's then allowed. So I don't have enough information. All I have is that right angle, and I have this side, which is the hypotenuse, but I don't have a leg matched up. And so no, I can't prove that these two triangles are congruent. There's not enough information to do it. In these, we want to figure out what is the extra piece of information we need in order to use HL. And so we're not going to have enough information, but that's the question. What else would we need to know? Remember, there's three things to check for. Even though there's only two letters in HL, we do need a hypotenuse, we do need a leg, but remember that third part we also need to make sure that we have a right angle. So we still need to check for three things. Okay? So let's see what we've got in this first diagram. I've got a right angle. If I have a right angle there, this has to be a right angle as well because they need to add up to 180 degrees. So I have the right angle. I can add the tick mark for reflexive property. BD is congruent to BD. And that side is going to be a leg in the right triangle. And so what I still need then, I have the right angle, I have the leg. The final piece of information I would need is the hypotenuse. And so knowing that the hypotenuse is the longest side across from the right angle, those are the two sides I would need to know are congruent to each other. So AB would have to be congruent to BC. And again, to clarify, as we've done in the other videos, I don't know that that's true. I can't just add those tick marks, but the question this time is, what else would I need to know? That's what I would still need to know. And then in our last diagram, I can see I've got these sides matched up. If this was a right triangle, I would call those the legs, so I have a leg matched up. I can see that this side matched up, and if this was a right triangle, that would be the hypotenuse. And so some people say, well, there's nothing else we need to know. We have the hypotenuse, we have the leg, so we have HL. But I'm saying if this was a right triangle because that's the missing piece of information this time. I don't know that this is a right triangle. I can't just assume that. And so in this case, the missing piece of information is that I would need to know that angle B and angle D are right angles, and I can't just assume that. So the piece of information that's missing is that angle B and angle D, not that they're congruent to each other like we've been doing, although they would be if they're both right angles. I don't need them congruent to each other. I need to know that angle B and angle D are right angles. That's what I can't prove right now. That's what I can't assume, but that's what I would need to know in order to use HL.